Good afternoon. We're going to talk today a little about the future of field service. My name is Ben Vollmer. I'm a global director of field service at Microsoft. We're going to go on a journey for the next about 30 or 40 minutes talking about what field service is going to look like in the future. So I want to first of all set up expectations. This is not going to be a product futures. We're not even going to look at product in this presentation. We're literally going to just talk about where the business of field service is going, how it's adapting and changing, and how you, as either a customer or a partner, can look at those changes and make those changes in your own business today. First thing we're going to talk about is what is field service? How do we define field service? How does the industry define field service? What is field service going to look like? We're going to what has changed? What's the future? What's the past of field service changed? What are you going to show us the future field service is going to look like? What are the trends that are going on in the marketplace today? What is the change that's happened here in 2020? And what changes really on the immediate horizon that we should be looking at and taking advantage of? So when it comes to what is field service, I love to start talking about geography. I know you probably didn't come here today and looking for a geography lesson or think you're going to get a geography lesson, but let's do a geography lesson nonetheless. This is most of the continent of Asia. You know, we all know Asia, or most of us should know Asia. It's the world's most populous continent. It has 9 of 10 world's tallest buildings in it. It has the highest point and the lowest point in the world, all on one continent. What's this? Again, apologize for my picture format here, but what is this? This is Europe. Now, what's interesting here, I thought was interesting, was Europe has the world's largest country in it, which is Russia. If you overlay Canada on top of Europe, you'd cover most of Europe. Interesting stats here. But what's interesting, though, is there's a country, though, we want to talk about, which really, to me, describes and shows you what field service is. Does anybody know what this is? In its history, it's been a mosque. It's been a Christian cathedral. It's been a museum. And just recently, again, it was made a mosque again. What city is this in? You have to go consult your geography books. I'm sorry, I failed my job today. But really with the city, this is really Turkey. So the city that is, of course, is Istanbul. What makes Istanbul interesting for me, and this is where it really comes back in field service, is it sits on 2 continents. Part of Istanbul sits on the European plate, and part of Istanbul sits on the Asian. So, if you will, Istanbul is unique in that it would be the largest city in Europe if it was all in Europe. It'd be one of the largest cities in Asia if it was all in Asia. But it really spans those 2 continents. So, you're like, okay, Ben, big deal, so what? When you think about field service is really a spanner much like Istanbul. You have some CRM stuff. You have some customer experience, customer journey stuff we care about. But then you also have operational stuff. So if you come at field service from an ERP perspective, or you come at it from strictly a customer experience perspective, you're going to miss the other half of the perspective around field service. So really the goal for this today is to show you how you really bring those journeys together to make sense for you. So what does field service look like? I would do a couple things here. One is let's look for industrial trucks. And I tell people this all the time during sessions. That truck over there is Microsoft Real Estate and Facilities truck. Actually, I got that outside of the Advanta building there in Bellevue. You can tell it was snowing that day. But think about this for a second. How many trucks and vans of a commercial nature are sold every year? I mean, no. You take out tractor trailers, you take out passenger vehicles, you're looking for just commercial trucks. In a course of 3 years, 75 million of them are sold. So that's not all of field service. Not gonna be, you can use it for other things too. But when you think about that, that's a great idea of how many people are doing field service. Another example would be hard hats. Not hard hats like my wife says I have, but a hard hat. There's about 350 million hard hats sold annually. Now, both in the EU and in North America, the law says the hard hat can be in use for 3 years, then it has to be thrown away. So when you think about it, there's really 1 billion hard hats out there. And guess what the biggest industries are for hard hats? all the same ones that are for field service. So when you think about field service, I look for hard hats and commercial trucks or commercial vans, commercial vehicles, as a good indicator of a company's use of field service and how field service is in their firm. Now, it's not always the case. I have some customers who their technicians travel on public transit. Not the case there. I have some customers who their technicians fly out on airplanes. Again, not exactly identical, but at least gives you an idea of how big that field service market is and what it really looks like. When you look at what people do with field service, and this is aggregate across industry. So what I look for is when a customer says, hey, here's what I'm doing, these things generally map into field service. So the things I would say is installation. If they say, we install X or we install Y, that's a big thing for, yes, they use field service. If they say, we maintain something, another big one, we inspect. Those three things right there are huge. The last one here is kind of one of those, it can go both ways, and it's kind of interesting to look at and chart, which is projects. And the reason I say that is some of my customers actually do project work, which is a whole different conversation, whole different piece over here. But a lot of my customers really do projects which are chained work orders, where they have 5 days worth of work to be done, but it's 5 different work orders, maybe done by 5 or 10 different people. So when you think about projects, don't automatically flip over to project. Maybe look at what kind of projects they're doing, because they could be they're doing field service work as well. Now, field service is not one big pool that everybody does field service, looks alike, acts alike, smells alike, does everything alike. Not the case whatsoever. Gartner has defined what they call future operating scenarios. And what's nice about those future operating scenarios is actually allows us to see that not all field service is identical. So for example, kind of the bottom left there, you have what they call appointment centric. What is appointment centric? Think about, for example, here, the last time you had internet service installed at your house. That's a very appointment centric business. The skill level's pretty low, it's a package service, and away we go. That's a model of field service we automatically kind of just jump to and assume. But that's only 1/4 of the field service marketplace. Equipment centric. Think about it as complex equipment. Most of our customers in Dynamics use field service for complex B2B industrial scenarios, which really fits in that equipment centric, and then we follow it up with knowledge centric and outcome centric. And so really when you think about it, field service is not just one giant monolithic pie. The needs and desires and use cases actually shift as you move across those different models. So let's talk about the customer journey for a second here, because I think the customer journey is important for us to think about when we think about field service, because we a lot of times talk to a customer and their immediate thought goes into how do I bill for this service, which is important. But let's start with, so TSIA did some research when COVID first hit back in March, and they asked their members how many customer incidents or cases that came in their call center. And their average customer reported that 84,000 customer cases, what we call an incident, came in their call center in a month. And of those 84,000, 33,000 became work orders. So when you think about it here, 40% of those became work orders, and 60% of those required parts to be delivered to their end customers, their customers' customers. Now, let's do a little bit of math here for a second. The industry average for first-time fix rate is 74%. We'll get more of this in a few minutes here, but I'm going to just do the math here while we're doing some math. So we have 33,000 work orders a month. 8,000 of those work orders a month require a second visit. Now, what's interesting about the second visit from first-time fix rate is, on average, it takes 1.5 additional visits to fix that problem. So if I don't fix it the first time, it takes 2.5 visits before that problem is actually solved. Which means that of the 33,000 work orders, we have almost 20,000 work orders being done monthly visits being done to support those work orders we didn't fix the first time. So when you think about it, first time fix rate in the customer journey here is super important because it's got to go all the way from the contact center, first point of contact, first call resolution, all the way back down to first time fix rate on the customer journey side. So when we think about first time fix rate, again, the industry average is 74%. Your average and what you do might be different, might change. But you want to figure out what your first time fix rate really is. And by first time fix rate, I don't mean first time visit close. I mean first time fix where the problem doesn't come back. When you look at why technicians fail their first time or why you can't get out there, the reasons are actually pretty simple. They didn't have the expertise to solve the issue. Availability is quite often a skill set for some people in field service. So how do you make sure that you have the expertise to fix the issue? The technician lacked the right tool or part. I'm there to fix a fiber optic cable, and guess what? I don't have a fiber optic splicer. That's a big deal. The technician cannot access the required information. Two customer examples here I share, by the way. James Bowen does a great Power Virtual Agent demo on this for technicians. One of my customers, 80% of the calls that come in their call center were actually from their internal field service technicians. I have another customer that took their own phone numbers and ran them through their contact center, and 27 million calls a year came in from their own numbers because they didn't have access to that information themselves on their mobile devices. Now, there's two parts to that. One is the first time fix rate, and the second one is what's it cost for you to answer that phone call, even from an internal person? 10, 15, 20, 30, $40. I think $40 times 27 million. That's a lot of money. The last one is technician ran out of time. We didn't either book them enough time or they didn't have the right skills and resources to be able to do this successfully. And so really when you think about field service, the first thing you should look at is really what's your first time fix rate, because that's going to drive a lot of the decisions you make in the organization, how you start to look at this from a future perspective. The second thing I would say is interesting is this is actually a survey. There's a number of field service events globally. Microsoft's at most of them. Field Service USA here in the Americas, Field Service Europe, and Field Service Asia in Asia. And they actually survey why folks come to their trade shows. And for me, what's interesting here is while field service products are important for them to come there, IoT products are important for them to come there, contact center products are important for them to come there, training products are coming there, and parts management is important. So when you think about it, again, using back that analogy of turkey, what people look at in field service is not all in one bucket or another bucket. It's really a combination of those two buckets together that makes it required. Let's talk a little bit about the evolution of field service. My initial picture there had an evolution of types in it. I think the biggest change that's happened from an evolution perspective is not the actual business model itself, which we'll get into in a second here, but it's actually the customer's expectations. The customer's expectations around field service have changed drastically in the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years. The example I use here is my wife and I got married in 1999. I moved to Atlanta in 98. I ordered, ready for this, ISDN service, a whopping 256 kps. Woohoo, yay, that was high speed. I ordered it when I moved in November. It got delivered in May of that next year. It was 6 months before, at the time it was Bell South, delivered ISDN service to my apartment. Think about that now compared to what your expectation is. If you order internet service for your house, I moved a couple years ago, I called up my internet provider. I'm like, hey, I'm moving in a neighborhood. I need some internet service. And literally, they shipped me a kit. But I plugged everything in, wired it all up, hit OK, and I was done. And it was done, by the way, in 2 days. So what's really changed is that customers' expectations have drastically changed. Growing up as a kid, it was don't get in cars with strangers. Today, it's make sure that's your Uber or Lyft if you're not in California. So we have this expectation that's changed. We expect things to be there faster. We expect them to be proactive. And so really what's happened here, the biggest change that's happened in field service has been our customers' expectations have changed. And really that's led to a lot of changes in the industry and in the marketplace. And as such, what's happened then is the business models have shifted. If you think about cost center, is really focused on how do I extract as much cost as I can out of my supply chain. And it's really a cost-focused system. If you look at most field service systems of years gone past, they were ERP based. Now, I'm going to ask you, why were field service solutions ERP based? Who owns cost centers at most customers? If you said CFO, you win a prize. If you said anybody other than the CFO, well, you lost that game. Cost centers are owned by CFOs generally, and the CFO is going to have you use the system that they use, which is the ERP system. What we've noticed though is a change. It used to be about 80% of companies were cost focused. Profit center, that's where the majority of customers have moved to, which means they extract money, they extract resources out of their field service organizations. And how do they do that? Now I'm going to stop there for a second and just ask, if you're a partner, I'm going to ask you a question. If you're a customer, next time you have a partner presentation, I want you to kind of watch this and giggle for me for a second here. I sit through 100 or so customer partner presentations a year. In almost every one of these slide decks, there's a slide that says, here is our methodology to ensure success. Now you look at the next partner that comes down the line, they have another slide deck that says, here's our methodology to ensure success. Now if you were to overlap those methodologies, you're going to find a whole lot of similarities. Why? But why do they show that? Why do they even bother talking about that? Because they're trying to show differentiation. And so really the biggest thing in profit centers is, what's my differentiation? I think my favorite one is in Australia, there's a company called The Pink Plumber. It's women plumbers for women customers. Now, whether you agree with that, you disagree with that, who cares? But there's a differentiation. They figured out a market that differentiates and values the service they offer, and they're going after that via differentiation. They're 100% profit driven. And the last part here is really outcome driven. Outcome driven is something called servitization, and we'll use those terms interchangeably. It's not a made up word. I did not invent it. Know your dictionary, you won't find it. But when you think about it though, those are really the three models of field service organizations. And we've seen a huge shift from cost center to profit center, and now we're seeing that shift from profit center to outcome driven, depending on the company structure. An example of that, by the way, I love to use is actually Rolls-Royce. Now you guys have probably seen Rolls-Royce enough at Microsoft trade shows to get sick on it, but let's talk about what their financials here are. If you look at it here, the dark blue bottom that says OE, that is their original equipment sales over time. And so you can see they really have about a 20-year period. It's actually a little less than 20. It's about 15 to 20 years period where they sell their original engines. So they develop an engine and they sell it and they get paid for it for about 20 years. Now let's look at services. Aftermarket services, servicing that actual engine. That kicks in about year 10 or 12. So about 4 or 5 years after the engine's actually shipped, they start servicing them. And that revenue doesn't actually appreciably fall off until year 40. So they have about a 30-year span there where their services drive their revenue, not their product, not their OE product. That means that they really have a services business that sells a hard piece of hardware. Now, they introduced this thing called Total Care. You've probably seen this out there as Power by the Hour. What that really is, that's really their servitization model, where they're selling engines via the hour that they're used. Now, what's interesting though is, if you look at their market share of large engines for wide-body planes, went to 14% before this program was released. Now it's at about 35%. 90% of their customers plus pick Total Care as opposed to traditional purchase the engine and service the engine model they've had historically. So really, Rolls-Royce has moved into a subscription model. So we might call it outcome-driven, a subscription model, whatever else you want to call it. But really, Rolls-Royce has transformed their business for moving from selling an engine and service to selling them both together with an outcome being what they get paid on. So one of the things I like to do is figure out, how do you figure out what you as a company is, or if you're a consulting partner, how do you figure out what your customer is in that maturity model, so you can advise them. Now, I'll just tell you right now, the functionality of field service is 100% the same. It's really the business model around it that changes. But it's really the three questions you can ask. So how does your field service organization support your business goals? Now, if it's there in a we support the products we sell mode, you're almost always talking to a cost center focused customer. If it's really more about how do we stand out from the competition, how we make differentiation, you're talking to a profit center customer. And if it's really more about I want to drive my customers' outcomes, you're really talking about a servitization or outcome driven. How do you define success? Second question. How do you define success? If the first, second, and third words out of somebody's mouth is we're here to minimize cost, it's a cost center focused customer, 100%. Or if it's all around how do I get one more work order per day, or how do I get, if it's a metric that's driven off of cost, that generally means they're a cost center focused customer. Now, you also got customers who look at, from a profit center, they look at how do I drive customer loyalty and strong margins? Because those two things right there help show the differentiation and power of what we do. And the last one is really how do we achieve success of our customers' goals? So what's the goal of a RollsRoyce customer? To fly their airplane. So how does RollsRoyce monetize their service? By how many hours that airplane flies. The third and final question here is, how does your organization price the service you deliver? Well, if you go, hey, we take our costs, we add it up, or even sometimes it's even a cost negative. So for example, when I order internet service for my house, and that internet service provider gives me a free installation or $45 installation, it's costing them more than that to deliver that, but they're figuring that out as part of their cost model for their service model. In a profit center, they generally try to sell at a fixed price model, either fixed per unit or fixed per piece of equipment or fixed per service contract. They're trying to get a fixed price so they can maintain margin. And finally, in an outcome-driven world, it's all about how do we price based on the outcome that the customers receive. So for example, love it or hate it, in America, the pharmacy business is an outcome-driven business model. They figure out what does it cost for a person to do something in one way, and how can we charge enough for our prescription medication to overcome that. And that's really, they're really truly an outcome-driven model. And that's the same way a lot of other customers are and have been going. I'm not going to drain these here because honestly, you'll be asleep by the time I do. But in the deck, you'll get access to these slides here, talk about what the differences really there are. So what we're seeing in field service over the past 5 years, 10 years, has really been a huge amount of change. And I'm going to kind of break these changes down into a couple buckets. The first one I would say that the biggest change is in talent. So in the field service resources, finding technicians today is very, very difficult. We have more technicians retiring than are coming in the business. So we have this skills gap. And what I mean by skills gap, it's not a bad skills gap necessarily, but the analogy I use here is, I'm a car guy, I love cars. If you open up a 1972 Ford Mustang or Gran Torino or whatever else you want to look at, you open it up, everything on that engine looks identifiable. It looks like something you can work on, you know where all the bits and pieces are, and with a screwdriver, a 7/16 socket, and probably a hammer, you can fix most of that car. You open up my wife's Toyota, I open the hood of that thing up, and it looks like Rubbermaid made the entire inside of it. It's got plastic over everything, nothing's identifiable. And how the mechanics troubleshoot that? They plug a computer in and say, your computer says, no longer is it, I put a multimeter on it, say. So the changes that are happening are because the equipment has changed and the workforce has changed. And now as the workforce is retiring, the new people we need come in the bottom of the workforce, and the new hires need to have a different set of skills as well. Resource utilization, once I have those technicians, how much billable time, how much actual time they spent doing work? 51% of them say just by looking at that metric, they've actually increased the amount of billable time that they're doing, or recapture rate. A huge amount of customers are looking for and looking at and looking at the customer expectations. Think about even your personal life. Your expectations for a company when it comes to being serviced at your house or at your car or anyplace else are really driven off of rising customer expectations. Your expectations have gotten much higher than a lot of service organizations are there to determine, and that will make or break your service just the same way as phone service will or sales service will. The first three I would say are all kind of intertwined, which is you have products becoming services. So I've got products that are becoming servitized, where they're no longer selling the product alone, but they're selling the product on a subscription basis, which leads itself to Internet of Things or IoT with remote servicing, so command and control of those things, which then also leads to consumption and contract models that from a business model perspective have changed. So those are the 6 big key things we've seen prior to 2020 that have really impacted the world of field service. And now we're still seeing them impact it. We're going to talk about why here in a second. So what we're seeing right now, though, is I would say a period of rapid change. And what do I mean by rapid change? I think our CEO Satya Nadella said it best. We've had years of digital transformation happen in months. And so what we're seeing right now today, based upon the conditions today, is we're seeing customers go, I cannot keep doing business the way I've been doing business. I have to change. And so really what we're seeing, I would say, are 4 big changes that are really affecting the future of field service. The first one is asset management plus field service, or field service plus asset management, depending on which side of the equation you're sitting on there. Connected devices, we'll talk about that in a second here. A much more elastic workforce, and something I call co-browse plus, which isn't quite the official term, but we'll get into that here in a second. So let's go through these real quick. The lines between asset management and field service have blurred. It used to be that EAM was for internal assets and FS was for external assets. But what happens in a world of outcome driven? You own that asset. That's your asset now, just on a customer location. So do you need an AM solution? Do you not need an AM solution? Or you own an AM solution that was primarily for factories, and now your factories are spread all across the country, and you're specialized. How do you manage those? So really, what you end up seeing here, both on an internal and external basis, on the right-hand side, you end up with what field service really cares about. On the left-hand side is really what you see asset management caring about, and really kind of through the center are where things are shared. And so we're seeing a ton of asset management plus field service together to help make sure these things get operationalized. And we see this across the board in every industry globally. And I would say about 1/3 of our seats of field service are actually sold into companies that have an asset management solution that doesn't meet their needs because it lacks geospatial awareness, it lacks skills-based routing. There's all these things that lacks because these internal organizations are becoming much more like a field service organization externally. If you've been around me for any period of time, you've seen the connected field service workflow. But let's take the word field service out of it for a second. Let's just replace it with the word service. What we're seeing as part of what's happened in the past 6 months is we're actually seeing a huge amount of companies that cannot get resources onto job sites. So what do we have now? How about connected service workflow? So instead of creating a workflow, it creates a case. And now we have a call center agent actually doing command and control against those devices in the field. So you take this connected field service workflow, and really the first box becomes connected service. Can I fix this internally first before even looking at or talking to or dispatching a technician? And that's been a huge change in mindset of organizations, which was there's a very tight stratification between these are my field service techs and these are my CSRs or call center techs, and the two shall never blend. Now we're seeing a much bigger blending of them. We're actually having call center agents, call centers being embedded with field service techs to help make sure we solve customer issues when I can't go on a job site through command and control of remote devices. Let's talk a little bit about staffing models and a more elastic workforce. Now, we've done a bunch of work here. Gartner says that 40% of all work will be done by non-employees in 2020. And we think that's actually a little bit low. TSI says that 9 out of 10 organizations will and do use outsource something. We'll go into more details here. What we generally find, though, is we generally find that the staffing comes in kind of 3 ways. Staff augmentation, which is where I hire staff to do the job. Them an employee is really the color of the badge or who pays them. Then you have a part-time workforce where I'm bringing somebody in 1 or 2 days a week to do some work that's specialized and I need to have happen. What we've seen in the past 6 months has really been an accelerated trend, has really been, I would even call them micro freelancers. So we have customers, for example, who have tried to figure out how do they outsource pieces of their business that might be lower value. So how do I outsource the delivery of parts to a customer site other than using FedEx and UPS? How do I get people to a job site? How do I do things differently? And so we're seeing a lot more freelancers, and I'm going to call them micro freelancers, where we're taking pieces of the work order and we're subbing them out where we see low value to them at. So that's a huge trend we're seeing, which is really making our field service techs much more focused on the field service work, and a lot of low value work before that we were doing that we could cover up because there was enough other things going on. We can't do that anymore. And so we always think this is a cost center focused thing. And I would just say that based upon both the Service Council and Gartner's surveys, you'll see that increasing availability or increasing geographic coverage are actually huge reasons to do it. But really, the ability to fluctuate demand is actually a bigger reason for a lot of customers. So when you think about the ability to fluctuate demand and micro outsource jobs, that's been a huge trend we've seen in field service over the past couple of years. The last one we're seeing, and this is, I would say this is kind of a hidden note in the overall Wave 2 release notes. So I'm going to pop product here for a second. But you guys have all seen remote assist. But what about remote assist for your customers' customers? How do your customers' customers get a chance to see remote assist and work on it? So one of the things that's shipping in this next wave here is the ability for your customers' customers or vendors to be able to join a one-time call. This has been I call it Co-Browse Plus, which is really underselling its capabilities and requirements, but really it's the ability to take that same experience we have today and really let somebody else on the job site see it. And this has been huge because a lot of my clients haven't allowed external people in their workforces. So I have a customer that they sell mining equipment and they can't actually get people into the mining centers because the mine wants to keep a kind of a COVID bubble going on here. So this allows you to do that without any sort of extra skill sets or requirements. So this is actually the ability to enable support anywhere with your customers' customers. So if you haven't seen it yet, I would say go check it out. So with that, thank you very much for attending. I'm going to be here for questions and answers for a while. So thank you for talking about the future of field service. We appreciate your time.